6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to thank our witnesses for being here today. It's nice to see all of you here. Mr. Volpe, just want to chat with you for a little bit. Can you remind me, but also the committee, your members, they would work for all or supply all OEMs. That would include kind of your traditional domestics plus the international automakers here. Is that correct?
Correct. And from the Canadian factories, they definitely supply the 5 OEMs that are making cars here, but probably another dozen that make through the U.S. and down into Mexico. But they're also heavily invested in the U.S. with 176 plants wholly owned by Canadian companies and 120 plants wholly owned by Canadian companies in Mexico servicing vehicle assembly throughout the continent.
Thank you for that. And how many employees do you think would be representative of not just your membership, but say all the auto suppliers?
So about 100,000 directly in automotive supply here in this country, like putting hands on tools in factories. About 400,000 in support of those. Those are, logistics, raw materials, other white collar support functions for those companies. And then Canadian companies employ about 48,000 in the US and 58,000 in Mexico as well.
So it's a pretty big footprint, like as far as employment goes for, comparative to other industries that are under, I'll say under threat or under attack from the 232 tariffs.
Yeah.
I note that the government's provided some support for other affected industries. They've come out with some support for lumber. They've come out with some support with steel. Have there been any kind of direct industrial targeted support as a response to the 232 tariffs?
Yeah, we asked directly for a series of measures, most of which either came on directly or in different configurations. Smaller suppliers need liquidity support. The government announced a working capital fund availability through the BDC that a lot of the companies are accessing. On the wider vulnerability to the fact that 85% of the cars get exported from Canadian factories down to the U.S. and trying to turn around some of that dynamic to build where you sell, convincing our customers from Ford through Honda in this country to retool for products that Canadians are currently buying or could be expected to buy. There was a $5 billion fund that was not just for our industry, but also for steel and aluminum, and a series of tariff-related remissions programs that helped ease the burden while we're being targeted.
Thank you for that. So your point, I think, is your sector is under financial strain. Is that kind of...
No question.
Yeah. Right. And you referenced some government money that has been put aside, taxpayer money to support the industry. What about an idea that doesn't require any taxpayer support for the industry, just a change in regulation? The electric vehicle mandate is going to burden the sector. We heard testimony from one of your peers that represents automakers themselves, $1 billion already committed to purchasing credits from Tesla. Would that not financially strain the sector even more at a time when that becomes difficult already to deal with the tariffs?
Sure, I've been relentlessly on the record saying that the EV mandates, as they were configured, were unachievable, and that the only way to get to those levels, or the best way to get to those levels, were to buy credits from companies who were importing electric vehicles into this country who weren't invested here, like Tesla, who took advantage of that loophole that was in the federal purchase incentive, the ISEV program that allowed them to import cars from Shanghai with no Canadian content. And also companies like VinFast, who we admire. The Vietnamese are now in the business, but they're not. There's no Canadian content on that. We were very clear about it publicly, relentlessly with government. There is a 60-day review on. Um, I think I'm pretty clear. ECCC is pretty clear on how we think, but we want to see if they listen.
Thank you very much for that. I appreciate your advocacy for just what I think is, common sense, especially since a lot of this money is being given to or paid for by auto manufacturers and the supply chain who've invested billions of dollars here to companies that have no footprint here. I have 20 seconds left, so a final question. Another trade issue we're also dealing with at the committee. Would you recommend the government reduce the tariffs on Chinese imported electric vehicles?
No, there's no upside to that. There's no Canadian content in there, and the Chinese are not threatening to invest here either. So Mexico has just put a 50% tariff on all Chinese vehicles. I think it's important that all three North American countries are on the same page while we gross up our own.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Madam Chair.